right, welcome back to the podcast, guys. This one, it was a request from viewers and patrons and stuff, so I thought, why not? So this is everything from me living in Nigeria and Africa for 4 years. I lived in the Middle East for a couple years. I've flown rock stars and celebrities and traveled all over the world, and like how I got into sailing, how I lost my career as a commercial pilot, how I ended up doing YouTube and all that. And so like a lot of people wanted to know. And I thought, why not record a podcast? And if you find this interesting, great. If not, maybe it's not the most interesting, but I think it's kind of some interesting stuff there. So basically, how did I get into sailing? I was in 5th grade, and I remember waking up Christmas morning and seeing a Sunfish in the living room, like with the mast up and everything, because we had a pretty tall ceiling. And I was like, wow. So I'd never really sailed before at that point. It was my uncle somehow got one and gave it to me, or cousin rather. And so then my grandparents had a lake house. We took it to the lake house. So I spent the many summers just sailing that Sunfish all over Lake Tawakoni in East Texas. And then, of course, took some lessons in the Boy Scouts. That was like really my only formal training until, well, ever really. I did take a class with Island Spirit there. So, so I got it kind of young there. Not like the people in San Francisco, going out in the bay and, sailing on the open ocean, but it was still some stuff there. So I've got little notes here just so I can remember stuff. And then, so I read books about it in high school. There's a guy that circumnavigated in the 70s, and he wrote their books about it. I think they even made a movie about it. Somebody was called it. I think it was Dove was the name of the movie and book. I didn't even know there was a movie about it. I read the book. And, so I always wanted to retire early and do that. So then after high school, went to college. I went to Stephen F. Austin my first year and studied broadcast journalism. And but I partied too much, and so I did 1 year there, and my grades weren't good enough for my parents to keep paying for my college, so I went back home and got an apartment and started bartending and went to community college. I got my grades under control, got on some ADD meds, and went from straight D's to straight A's. And so my father was a corporate pilot, commercial pilot. He flew private jets. For most of his life. He flew cargo for a while, but mostly private jets, doing that kind of thing. And so then I was like, all right, I need something to do. I might as well become a pilot. So I went back to, this time, Central Texas College, University of Central Texas. Ended up graduating from Charlton. They could change hands like a million times. Now it's Texas A&M at Central Texas, I think. So I went back to college to become a pilot. And I have a bachelor's degree in aviation management from Tarleton State University, and so I was already finished with classes summer of 2001. I actually had I was already done classes, but in order to graduate though, I needed to get my flight instructor rating. So I actually had my flight instructor and then get a job flight instructing because you get class credit for working. So I was already done with classes. I had my check ride for my certified flight instructor rating scheduled for September 11th, 2001. I was sleeping on a friend's couch down there in Killeen, Texas, because I wasn't living there anymore, because that's where my check ride was. And so I remember my mom called me and woke me up, and I was sleeping on the couch, and I woke everybody up in the house, and we started watching. We were watching live as the second tower hit. It was pretty crazy. So then, obviously, my check ride canceled that day, and a few weeks later, they rescheduled my check ride. I got a job, and so then I got my flight instructor rating. So I ended up graduating college spring of 2002, although my last class was actually summer of 2001. So after I got my rating, I did flight instructing for a couple of years. When you're flight instructing, especially back then, we were only making like, I might say 13 or maybe it was $25 an hour flight. I don't remember. Maybe it was 15 and 13 ground school, something like that. But that wasn't enough to pay the bills, right? So I was working at a bar in the evenings, and I was interning at Simuflight. So at DFW Airport, they have Simuflight, which is where they teach corporate pilots to fly specific airplanes. So they have all their ratings and everything like that, but then you have to get a type rating for each airplane. So each airplane has its own school. It's generally 2 weeks to a month, depending on how complex the airplane is and all that. So I was helping with the Gulfstream 2s and 3s. And so what would happen is if a single client came in to fly and learn, they had to be paired up with the co-pilot, right? And so, because it's a two-person airplane, so I would be his professional co-pilot during training. But so after September 11th, there were no aviation jobs. Everybody I knew that went to college that had graduated before me, I mean, they were going straight with 400 hours to the right seat of a Beech 8, whatever, I don't know, Embraer or something like that, regional jet. They were making garbage money. I mean, they were making like 18, 19 grand a year. But you do that for 1 year and you get off probation, and they're making like 40 grand or 35. Now it's completely different. Now they're making a lot more money than they used to. But but there were no jobs. Everybody was getting furloughed. Everybody was getting laid off, and there were very few jobs. So I was actually in the process of selling everything I owned. I remember I put everything up on eBay because I don't think we had Craigslist at the time. Maybe we did. I don't remember. But I remember putting it on eBay and selling things. And all I had left was to sell my car. And I had always, like I said, dreamed about sailing around the world. So I was going to sell my car. I would have maybe had 15 grand total if I sold my car plus all my savings or something. And I was going to buy like a $10,000 piece of junk boat. And my plan was just to sail down to the Keys, or if I could make it to the Caribbean, great, get down to the Virgin Islands, and then, live on the boat, get a job at a bar. I'd been working at a bar already, so, it wouldn't have been too hard. But I was at Simuflight. I wish I could remember the guy's name. I can see his face. I can't remember his name. There's a guy coming through as a single pilot, worked for a charter company out of California, out of Van Nuys, near Los Angeles area, called Pacific Jet. And he went in there, a single pilot, and said, hey, I guess he liked what I did, because I had been interning there for over a year, maybe a year and a half, so I knew that airplane like the back of my hand. I'd run the emergency checklist 500 times, right? So I knew the airplane forwards and backwards. I knew all the approaches, and I was pretty sharp on there. And so then he said, would you like a job? And I said, yeah. So he had me interview with his chief pilot. I flew out to California. I think they even hired me basically just on a phone interview. We still went out there and whatever. So I moved to California, started flying for Pacific Jet. It was a lot of fun. I ended up living with a buddy that I had met in Dallas, that he had a house in Oxnard. And in hindsight, that probably was a mistake. I probably should have tried to live in LA somewhere. Oxnard is this sleepy little, beach town, south of Ventura, north of LA. Not much going on, so there's not a whole lot of social life there. Not a lot of young people live there, right? And I was 23, 24, 25 maybe. And anyway, but I was gone 20 days a month. This was the good old days of charter, where it was even different before, but this is before they had computerized flight logs and all that. It was kind of the Wild West on they expect you to, because there weren't any jobs, they expect you to work hard. We worked hard and we played hard, though, so it was a lot of fun. But flew tons of celebrities. Aerosmith, flew them on tour for several months. It was me and another guy, Scott. I won't say his last name, but he's still a good buddy of mine. We were their preferred pilots. So one of us was always on the airplane. Most of the time it'd be me and Scott flying Aerosmith around, and then we would rotate out for other pilots to come in and fly them. Aerosmith really liked us. They were really nice people. I met Steven Tyler and all them. This was in their sober days, so they weren't partying and everything. They were very reserved, very nice people. Always wanted good conversation, stuff like that. So flew them around many months. Also flew Sammy Hagar, 50 Cent, the Kardashians, Julianne Moore, Jennifer Connelly, Miranda Kerr, flew her to Paris. Accidentally saw her naked. That was interesting as a 24-year-old. I was unloading baggage, and so it's in the back of the airplane. And so I thought they were gone off the airplane already. And so I turn around and I'm walking back I open the door, walk back in the cabin, and she's sitting there just with her naked, changing clothes. I'm like, oh, sorry. Just turn around, go right back in the, and she'd already had a kid. I think she was married to Orlando Bloom at the time. No, she'd already broken up with him. But I was like, wow, she was gorgeous. Anyway, so flew out of Van Nuys, but we also had a big base in Teterboro. So New York City, Teterboro, New Jersey is kind of the hub for private airplanes going into New York City. And so we were in New York City so much. At Pacific Jet, we had, a dozen, maybe 20 airplanes. And so each airplane requires 2 pilots and a flight attendant, right? And so all the captains are in their early 30s, and all the first officers were in our mid to late 20s, and all the flight attendants are young and hot. And So rather than like put us all up in hotels at $200 a night, because there would always be at least 6 or 12 people in Teterboro every night. So that gets real expensive getting a hotel. So they rented 3 4-bedroom houses all next to each other. So we would just take the bedrooms and like, it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was like a frat house. We always said we should, because it's like Real World had just come out or something like that. We're like, we should make this into a Real World, but we probably shouldn't because we don't want to like get in trouble or get fired or whatever. But it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun in that house, in those houses. And like I said, it was work hard, play hard, and we did that for the company at first because like you have a 14-hour duty day and 10-hour flight day as your requirements for your max. Then they think they've kind of changed the rules since then. But as far as like it depends on when your duty day starts and all that. But at the time it wasn't, and we would just work extra hard for the company. I won't say anything other than that. And then, but they would take care of us, I mean, they'd be like, hey, you guys went above and beyond this week. We're going to go out and have a nice dinner at whatever, the steakhouse, and we'd spend, 3 people, we'd go out and get some nice wine and all that, spend $500 and like have a good time. It was just like, whatever. And, we worked hard for them. They helped us out and things. It was a lot of fun. And then, money started getting tight at the company and they started just stop doing that. And then, so they were giving us like a per diem. I don't remember how much it was a day. I think it was like $60 a day per diem. So when you're out, and then they went to like $2 an hour. So then we had to be like, okay, we were away from base. I don't know. We left at 5 p.m. We got back at 4 a.m., whatever. It's just like, so then we had to, it got crappy. And then, and I wasn't really happy living in Oxnard. I was basically living out of my suitcase. It was a lot of fun, but I was living out of my suitcase. And so then I got a job offer for a charter company in Dallas called Business Jet. So I took that job, moved back to Dallas, and I was only there a few months. And I was a first officer on a Gulfstream 2s and 3s. And then they had a plane crash. So they had a Gulfstream 3 with, I think it was Ford Dixon and Mike DeSalvo, and then a flight attendant. I don't remember her name. They were flying from Dallas down to Houston to go pick up George Bush Sr. And the particular Gulfstream 3 they were in had a pretty modern cockpit. It had more of a Gulfstream 4 cockpit. So it was very computerized, very digital, not analog. And Ford was, in his 70s and Mike was in his late 60s. And, they weren't the best at the computers. And it's my understanding, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm pretty sure. So, like, I don't want to get in trouble legally if I'm speaking out of school or something. But, like, they programmed the computer wrong and thought they were flying an ILS when they were really flying like a VOR approach. So totally different vertical guidances and lateral guidances. I won't get into it too deep because it's not that kind of show. And they got too low on the approach and crashed. I think they hit a light pole and crashed and died. And luckily, there was no passengers on board. I mean, it's really sad about the pilots. But so that happened, and then I was new at the company, so like I was gonna be that happens, you're gonna get laid off because your business is gonna go way down. You're not gonna need as many pilots. I mean, the handwriting was on the wall. I knew I was gonna, and I was new, so like I knew I was not gonna be there very long. There was another charter company across the way called Regal Aviation, and they hired me as a captain. And because I'd only had like 3,000 hours, but I had, most of that time was in Gulfstreams, and so like I was very experienced in the airplane. Maybe I had 3,000 or 4,000. I don't remember how many hours I had. They hired me as a captain. I got a little pay raise to go there, not a big one. And then when I get there, then their insurance all says, well, we can't authorize him to be a captain because he only has 3,000 hours. We need him to have like 4,000 hours. And I was like, well, that's going to take at least another year, maybe a year and a half. And so I was pretty unhappy with that because I was going to be making, anyway. So I worked for them for like a year, and then I got a job offer as a captain on a Gulfstream 3 for a private company, an oil company. And, flew for them for several years out of Dallas. And then what happened? So then oil company, it's the mid-2000s, they're a royalties company. They started not doing so great, so the first thing they get rid of is the airplane. So, I'm laid off. And then I pick up a contract in Amman, Jordan. So this is like 2005. So I get a contract as a captain on a G3 out of Amman, Jordan for 6 months. And so I lived out of a hotel in Amman, Jordan, and Cairo. We mostly spent between Cairo, Egypt, and Amman, Jordan. And we flew all over Africa, the Middle East, all over Europe. The problem was is they build themselves as a Part 91 company, which means private ownership, meaning they're not operating the airplane like a taxi. They're operating it for themselves, and they clearly were not. They were clearly operating charter, like paid people to be on the airplane, and it was an American registered airplane. It was totally illegal to do, and so I didn't feel comfortable doing it. But I got a lot of cool experiences flying with them. I got to, I went around the pyramids and I did the stuff Petra and Jordan, and then, I flew like the prime minister of Somalia or something. I think it was Somalia. We picked him up in Kenya because we couldn't fly into Somalia, and we flew him to Libya. So we fly and we land in Libya. This is before their civil war, basically, and Gaddafi was still in power. And we land. I didn't really know what was going to be happening. I didn't understand what we were doing specifically, but we landed, and they had this big red carpet of all these military stuff, and they have all the, they're on parade. There's a ton of soldiers, and then you have Gaddafi standing over there meeting him, and then the prime minister walks off, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and so we flew into Sirte. Was that Sirte or Trip? I think it was Sirte. Then we repositioned the plane over to Tripoli. And it was cool. It was getting to see Libya. I went and saw the Arch of Marcus Aurelius. Some cool stuff. I don't even know if that stuff's around now after their revolution. But it was cool being able to do all that kind of stuff. And then, was that the same company? Went to Sierra Leone? Yeah, I think it was. Went to Sierra Leone and hung out there for 6 days and, just saw some interesting stuff. And then, so we had taken the airplane to Basel, Switzerland for maintenance. And I ran into a guy that I met during training at Simuflight, and he was flying captain on a Gulfstream 3 out of Nigeria for an oil company, and he was leaving the company and asked if I wanted to take his job. So I did, and so I started working with this Nigerian oil company, and I worked for them for 4 years. So I moved to mostly Abuja, Nigeria, and Maiduguri. So Abuja is the capital city in Nigeria. When I was in Abuja, I would live in a hotel. There was either the Hilton or the Sheraton. And so I lived in a hotel there for weeks at a time. And then when we were in Maiduguri, which was in the far northeast of Nigeria, there weren't really hotels. It was a pretty small town. There was only a handful of expats, like maybe 4. There was a couple Turkish guys I became friends with. And then there was some Lebanese guys. There was a guy, Shafiq. He owned the restaurant, the one restaurant there that I would really go to. It's called Hot Bites. He was a Lebanese guy, and really, really cool spot. It would turn into a kind of a club on the weekends. And, so when I was in Maiduguri, though, so the guy I worked for, I won't say his name or the company just for their privacy, but he, so the way it works over there is if you own a company, if you want to invest in a company in Nigeria, it's got to be 51% locally owned. So he got to be the lucky 51% owner of this Nigerian oil company. The rest of the stuff was owned by another oil company out of Houston. They were the ones that basically ran the show. But he did his part. Plus, then he got pretty lucky. And then I'm sure he had to know the right people, and they probably, who knows, I don't know how that stuff works, but so he had a big compound there, and he had his main house, which was like 10,000 square feet, and he had 4 houses for his wives. Each of them were like 3 or 4 bedrooms and like 2,500 square feet, but he only had 3 wives at the time. So I lived in his 4th wife's house, and it was interesting. We went all over there. We did I've flown to the Congo, Chad, Mali, South Africa, all over the Middle East. We'd go to Dubai several times a year. We go to Abu Dhabi several times a year. We go to Saudi Arabia quite a bit. Like Saudi Arabia, we'd go to, well, he was very Muslim, so we would take him to Medina, which is, where Mecca is. And so he would stay there for a week or 2 at a time. And so I would just leave. I would go back. We'd put the airplane away, and I'd go to, occasionally I'd have to stay for a night or 2. but I put the airplane to bed and then get on an airline and fly to Dubai, because it was only like 45-minute flight, because it's a haram area, meaning non-Muslims are not allowed in that area, and so they did have this little corridor from the airport to these 2 hotels where you could go, but then you weren't allowed to leave the hotel. So I wasn't going to do that. So I wasn't going to stay in the hotel for like a week. So I would, I'd fly to Dubai and hang out, and then I'll kind of get into it later. But that's kind of how I ended up living in Dubai. But it was funny. You take off out of Saudi Arabia, and all the girls are wearing the women are wearing their burqas. As soon as they take off, they go to the bathroom, and because they're going out of Saudi Arabia, they change and they're wearing a halter top and stuff. So it's kind of interesting. But so I spent a lot of time in Saudi Arabia. We went to like the Prime Minister of Chad's house, like in Chad, and he had this big barbecue basically outside, and he had like 6 or 8 carpets set out, and so I was sitting around one of the carpets with some of the other, I don't know, dignitaries, and then they would bring out these giant platters each with a whole goat on it, stuffed with couscous, and then the flies would come in. They were just like, it was like so many flies, and then there was no silverware. Everybody was just like, they had a plate, and then everybody was just kind of eating with their hands, and like it was kind of gross, but like I did it, right? Just because I didn't want to seem rude. So that was interesting doing that. And then like in Abuja, I preferred Abuja because at least there were expats there. There was a golf course I would play. And then, but you still really couldn't go out, because like you would go out and it's just, I mean, I hate to say it, but like it was just hookers. Like you go to a bar and like you get hit on by hookers. I'm like, I just don't want that. So the only place I would go out really was, there were some casinos in the hotels. I just go to the casino, and I kind of became friends with the casino guys. They had a bar down there. They didn't allow, hookers in there, so I'd go hang out there, and like I joined their, fantasy golf club and stuff like that. So, and then I joined they called it the Hash Harriers or something like that. So it's real big outside the U.S., not too big inside the U.S. There's a running club. So every other weekend, we'd meet somewhere and do a running club. It'd be like, normally it's a 10K, and they like set a trail using like bits of like shredded paper, and like there'd be false trails, and and like you do these little chants as you're going and stuff like that. There's a stop halfway through where you drink a beer, and then at the end, somebody gets nominated, like they did the biggest jackass move or something like that, so they got to wear this shirt. So there was a shirt that whoever lost that week had to wear the shirt, and the deal is like the shirt was never washed, so that shirt was nasty, because then you'd pour beer on them and then they're sweating in it, and it was just gross, and like if you wore new shoes, you had to drink a beer out of your shoe. It was stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. And like I remember one time we went over to the ambassador, so then somebody would have a barbecue after, and we went over to the ambassador of France's compound, and we're having barbecue. And then there's 2 girls serving food, and they're just start arguing. Next thing you know, they're fighting, like they're punching each other. One girl grabs like a beer bottle and breaks it and is trying to stab the other girl. And then some guy just lays her out to get her. And she falls down but pops right back up and grabs a plate, and she's trying to break it to stab the girl. And then the security guards finally get there and pull them apart, and there's like blood all over the place. And like I'm like going, oh my God, what the hell's going on here? So that was fun, to say the least. So a lot of cool experiences there. We would spend 6 months a year in Nigeria, maybe 7. Couple months a year in Europe. We do Paris a lot. We did London a lot. We did some other places in Europe, and then we go to the States and spend a couple months a year in the States. So it was a good experience flying all over the place over there. But the problem was, especially when I was in Maiduguri, I was just bored. And didn't like living there. We went to Ghana one time, and I really liked Ghana. And there's a big expat community there, and it seemed a little more chill and safe. And I wanted to live in Ghana, but the airline service was not real reliable getting back. And I asked my boss, I'm like, hey, can we just buy for $150,000? Can we buy a Bonanza? You get to keep it, right? But I just want to be able to commute back and forth. And he was like, no, why? You have everything you need here. You have a house, and you have, somebody brings you food, and like you have a maid and all that. I'm like, yeah, but I'm bored, right? Like I'm living, anyway. So one of the trips that I had done to Dubai, while I was doing there too, I went to South Africa. That was a lot of fun. I actually had like 6 days off, so I flew to South Africa. just to go. And because it was too far, it was only a 6-hour flight compared to going back to the States, which would have been like 15. So the flight was supposed to leave at 11 o'clock at night. I don't know, the captain didn't show up or whatever. So like they canceled the flight until like 8 a.m. the next morning. So, me and a bunch of South Africans, they're all going to put us in buses and take us to the hotel, and they're all like, no, don't do that. Let's just. So we went to the bar, and we paid the girl to like keep the bar open till 5 a.m. and then everybody just slept in the terminal. But like we had a fun time at that bar till like 5 a.m. drinking and having a good time, whatever. And then everybody just kind of passed out. Half the people that went to the hotels came back because they were like, no, those hotels were sketch. Anyway, so I made some friends down there. I made some friends on that flight. And then so flew to South Africa, hung out in Cape Town, and hung out with some of those guys for a while, and had a great time, and then whatever. But anyway, so that was fun. I really liked Cape Town. I mean, now it's gotten a lot worse. This is all like from 2006 to 2009, I believe, is when I lived in Nigeria. So like 4 years, 2006, 7, 8, 9. And then 2009, I got a job offer for Fly Dubai, an airline, brand new airline out of Dubai, little sister airline to Emirates. They were flying 737s. Like I was there when their first flight took off, right? Their first commercial flight. And so I got a house. So 2009, if you know, was when, they had the real estate collapse in Dubai. So like everything was way cheaper, like apartments. So I got an apartment on the 6th floor of the, what was the name of it? I'd have to look it up. But on the Palm Jumeirah, so like right at the top of the trunk of the Palm Jumeirah, I had a gorgeous place. It was so awesome. The Tiara Residences. And like I was paying, I don't know, $3,500 a month, but for a 1-bedroom and somewhere that was cheap. So like, yeah, you don't pay tax in Dubai, but everything's so expensive. So like there's a built-in tax. So I go there, and then, they promised me basically making 180 grand a year or whatever, but I'm not flying as much as they say. I'm only flying like 40, 50 hours a month, and pilots, that's how you get paid, is by your flight hours. And I was only flying like maybe half of what they said I was going to fly. And so I was only making like 2/3 of the pay I was supposed to be making. And like, that's like, and Dubai's expensive. And so like, I just didn't enjoy it there. And like, I wasn't getting as much time off as they said either, because they had us on standby all the time. And like, I just didn't enjoy it. The company, I did not enjoy the company. I enjoyed my coworkers and living there for the most part, but I didn't enjoy the company. So I only stayed there a year. But then also I got a job offer back in Dallas, Fort Worth rather, where I'm from. So my dad, like I said, was a corporate pilot. He was chief pilot for a company in Fort Worth. And so he was going to be retiring soon. And so they hired me on to basically replace him. So I moved back to Fort Worth. This was 2010. And worked for them. I worked there for a couple years. We mostly just flew like domestically in the United States. Like Miami and Denver and Palm Springs were kind of our, in New York, places like that were kind of our hotter spots. And then we would occasionally go to Asia or South America. Never went to Europe there. But I worked for that company for 5 years, from 2010 to 2015. I got engaged in like 2011 to a girl, and then like a week we were engaged. Well, we were together for almost a year. We got engaged after like 6 months or something, and we were supposed to get married like 6 months later. But then like 8 days before the wedding, she flies out to California to see her brother, and she comes back and she calls it off. And I'm like, oh my God, whatever. So yeah, anyway, whatever, it all worked out. So then flying for them, then my dad retires. I'm now chief pilot. Everything, life is good, right? And then September of 2015, I wake up with about the worst headache. Sorry, I hadn't drank the night before or anything. I just woke up with about the worst headache I've ever had. And I do the exact wrong thing. I didn't know I had a brain bleed going on, but I did. And so like, I normally don't take a lot of Advil or Tylenol or whatever, but I did that morning just because the headache was so bad. So I took some Tylenol, and I didn't realize I had a brain bleed going on. So that probably made it worse. So I lay back down, and it doesn't get any better. So then I pick up my phone to text my then girlfriend, and she's a dentist, so doctor. And I don't even remember the conversation, honestly, but she said, get to the hospital right now. Like, maybe I wasn't making sense. I don't know. And I remember driving myself to, vaguely, it's just flashes, vaguely. There was like a Primacare, like a, dock in a box type place, like a couple blocks from my house. So I drove myself, probably shouldn't have, I'm having a stroke, right? She has a friend meet me there. It takes 10 or 15, 20 minutes maybe, I don't even know, to talk to somebody, but like, as soon as the doctor sees me, my friend's there, goes in with me, and the doctor's like, get him to the hospital right now. So we go to the hospital. I'm not there 5 minutes. I'm getting a CT scan. I'm on a helicopter 20 minutes later, maybe 10 minutes later, to a hospital that specializes in neuro cases. So I was in Plano Medical Center, I think is where they took me. I immediately after that, I think I get another scan or something. I don't remember, but then they give me an angiogram immediately. And so that's where they go in through your femoral artery, and they go up into your brain, and like they sealed off the brain bleed from there with some kind of like glue. I don't know. It was called Onyx, I think is what it was. So I was in the neuro ICU for 10 days. They did 2 more angiograms, one from the artery side and one from the vein side, just to kind of make sure it's all glued up and I've stopped bleeding. I was in a lot of pain, not only from like the brain, so it was a hemorrhagic stroke. So I was bleeding. It was a dural AV fistula. So back there, it was between my my vision and my language center. So like I couldn't read. And so so I never actually lost blood flow to any part of my brain, but like if there's blood in between your brain tissue, it like messes with the neurons firing. And so like I couldn't read. Anyway, it was a lot of pain. They had me on pain like the whole time, drips and all that. I'm glad I didn't know any drug dealers when I got out of there, because like they cut me off cold turkey and said, all right, see you later, you're cured. And I'm like, so that would have been bad had I known a heroin dealer or something. But yeah, so I was in the neuro ICU for 10 days, the regular hospital for 1 more day, and then they let me go. But at that point, I mean, I knew, so anything brain or heart related, it's an automatic 2-year layoff from flying before you can even attempt to get your medical back. And if I was flying for an airline, they have, unions for that. So you pay your union dues, and they give you lawyers and doctors, and they help you get it back. But I was corporate, so I was flying on my own. I didn't have anybody in my team like that. Unfortunately, like 6 months before that happened, I looked into loss of license insurance. But it was like, I was 38, 37, and it was $600 a month. But if I had done it, it would have paid me my salary 75% for 5 years. And that's tax-free because it's insurance. So I was like, man, if I had done that. But probably for the best, because I wouldn't be doing this what I'm doing right now. So anyway, so then I knew what my days as a pilot were numbered. It was just a matter of time. So then to help myself relearn to read, my mom was at the time a very successful realtor, kind of in the higher end market in Dallas. And then she's still doing real estate. She retired for a while. She kind of unretired and is working part-time now. She's still doing it. So, I knew a lot about real estate from her. So I was like, let me just get my real estate license. So it took me about 2.5 months to get my license. And plus I had to relearn how to read. Mostly I think it had to do with like, reabsorbing the blood that's in your tissue to like let your brain work normally again. Plus then the way I would describe it, like, when you're reading something, you're not looking at N of the is, you're just skipping most of that. You're looking at the big patterns and you're putting the stuff together. That's why like you can switch words around and stuff like that and you won't even notice it when you're reading. Well, my brain wasn't doing that anymore. I had to look at each word and then go, L-I-V-E-D, lived, right? So I had to like think about each word. But once I saw the word and I got the pattern again, like it came back. So it's kind of weird. And then I was having a hard time with like words too. I couldn't think of if I hadn't used a word yet since my hemorrhage, stroke, whatever, it took me a long time to think of that word. But once I thought of that word and I basically had it back in my vocabulary, it was kind of a weird thing. So got the stroke happened in September. I think I got my real estate license by January. And then I got laid off in February, so then I was depending on my real estate income. But I was making low six figures, but like to live that same kind of like make my house payment and all that stuff, I had to make a lot of money, right? So I was spending $10,000 a month just on advertising, and so that means I needed to earn $20,000 a month just to like maintain my lifestyle, and that was just very stressful. I mean, it was a very stressful job for that reason. Plus, then it's just a stressful job in general. I didn't really enjoy it. But so when I was doing that, though, I was listening to there's a podcast. He's no longer running it, which is a shame because he was very good at it. It was called the Sailing Podcast. I don't remember his name. I think he was Australian, but maybe not. I don't remember. So I would listen to his podcast as I'm driving around doing real estate, and at some point he interviewed Sailing the Vagabond, and so I was like, well, that's interesting. I think at the time they had 100. Maybe when he did the interview they had 60,000 subscribers, but by the time I actually looked them up on YouTube, they had 150,000 subscribers. So then I started watching their videos. This was in 2016, this summer of 2016. And, I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to go sailing and cruising. I've always been afraid maybe I wouldn't retire early enough to enjoy it or have enough money stocked away to do it. Let me just go do it. So I sold my house, sold everything I own, and bought a $25,000 boat. And my plan was that, I didn't have a girlfriend anymore, whatever. So I was just going to go sail around and make YouTube videos until I ran out of money. And then I would then sell the boat, and then maybe by then I'm hoping I would have a year's worth of. I could go for a year. I would, have a year's worth of experience sailing, and then I could easily get a job on a boat. So that was my plan anyway. Bought the boat down in Houston. Didn't have a girlfriend or whatever. Like literally a week before I leave. So I'm already, I'm leaving Dallas anyway. So we're having kind of a good going away party with all my friends and everything. And then so Megan, I had been acquaintances with. We'd never been like close friends or anything. And she was at the party, whatever. And she didn't have a job because she had like a few months before she was just still recovering. She severely broke her arm, like really badly. Like it's pretty gross. So she wasn't working. And then her car payment was done, paid off, and her lease was up at the end of the month. And I was like, let's go. And so she did. I don't know how. I thank her for coming along. She joined me. She came down to Houston, and we took off sailing on that boat. Our first sail on that boat was crossing the Gulf of Mexico. It took us 5 days to get to the Dry Tortugas, and we hung out there for a couple days, and then on to Key West. And my parents were a little afraid because we told them 5 days. Well, we got to the Dry Tortugas in like it might have been 6 days. I don't know. There's no phone service there or internet or anything. So we actually, some tourists came in on a tour plane, and we actually wrote down a thing and said, hey, when you get back to Key West, can you, text or call my mom and let her know we're okay? So thankfully he did. So that put my mom at ease a little bit. And then we, sailed to Key West, and yeah, then in Key West, we went and bought one of those Garmin InReaches so that we could, then at least have a tracker and text and like emergency service. But, we didn't know any better at the time. And then, sailed from there, to the Bahamas, all the way down to, the Virgin Islands. Got as far as the Virgin Islands. And then a viewer bought a boat in St. Martin and asked us to go look at it because he bought it he's buying it sight unseen. So he paid me to go look at it, and then and then he paid us, not paid, I think we just got to use the boat for free, which was fine. And we did it on our own. We did it over like a month and a half. So then I took my boat, so we were going to do a delivery from St. Martin to Florida for him. And so I took my boat to Puerto Rico and put it in a marina there, and then we flew back, and I left Megan in Puerto Rico, and I flew to St. Martin and then sailed the boat back by myself from St. Martin to Puerto Rico, picked her up, and then we sailed to the Bahamas, and we spent a couple months going through the Bahamas, and eventually got the boat back over to like St. Petersburg, Florida. And so that was kind of season 1 of Sailing Doodles. Unfortunately, later that month, I had, Puerto Rico hadn't been hit by a hurricane in like something like 80 years, not a major one anyway. And then I think it was Maria hit, so this would have been 2017. Maria hit, I think it was Maria, hit Puerto Rico and did a bunch of damage to my boat, probably worth about $20,000 worth of damage. Well, the boat was only worth $20,000. So it wasn't worth, and I didn't have insurance on it because, like, insurance would have been, it wasn't worth, in hindsight, yeah, it would have been worth it, but it wasn't because it was crazy expensive for insurance. So I ended up just giving that boat away to a local there, and that guy refurbished it, and I think it's sailing again today. And then so, like, I didn't have a boat. I didn't know what to do. We were making just barely enough to live on, making the YouTube videos. So I was like, where can I go to make cheap content and maybe see what I can do? So I picked Thailand because cheap, right? And I was thinking maybe I could just turn it into a travel vlog and do that. And I made a couple travel videos in Thailand, and it didn't really work. I was kind of looking at boats, but I didn't really have much money. I didn't even have $25,000 anymore, right? I maybe had like 10, maybe not even that much. And so I called up, so one of my patrons recommended Island Spirit, which, they're building my new boat, but they're also, a yacht brokerage, yacht training, crew training, and building boats and all that stuff. So I called up the owner of that, Ron, and said, hey, this is what I do, whatever. And he's like, well, we don't really have anything in that price range, but you want to come look at our factory? And I was like, yeah, sure, can I film it? And so I went, and I ended up staying with him at his villa. It was really nice of him to put me up there. And we went and toured their factory where they made the Island Spirits. At the time, they made the 410, the 41 foot. So I made a video about it, and the video did really well, and got, for the time, I got like 50,000 views, like, first day. And so, they were like, wow, there's something here. Well, we've got this island, we got this Beneteau 50 in British Columbia that we want to bring over here to Thailand. And so this is October of 2017. And, we want to bring it over, but do you want to do that? You want to sail it to Thailand for us? I'm like, yeah, great. Cause I needed a boat. That gives me a boat. I can make content and all that. And so then they actually put me through their sailing school just so I can get in on their insurance. So that's where I got my Yacht Master offshore rating. And then, the next day I'm flying back to the States. I drop off some stuff say hi to my mom and whatever, and then fly up to Vancouver and get on that boat. Now it's late October, and, we got to go because the weather's turning bad. And so there was another patron. What was his name? Pierre? I forgot his name. I'd have to look it up. He's a Canadian guy. Really nice guy. Helped me sail it down to the States. And then I had met Laura. So Laura was with me in season 2. I had met her in the Virgin Islands the previous sailing season. And we had kept in touch. And, somehow she was a travel nurse. And I think her travel nurse thing was up and she was available, so she came and sailed, joined me on the boat in I think it was Friday Harbor, and we sailed down the west coast, made it to we did Thanksgiving in San Francisco. We made it to Cabo San Lucas by Christmas. We, at the time we were kind of, selling cabins to help offset costs, right? So we had some people, patrons and viewers join and stuff like that. So then we stayed down in Mexico. We got there by Christmas. We stayed down in Mexico. I got dive certified there in Cabo. We made some friends. We went up into the Sea of Cortez for a bit. And then March, we were waiting for hurricane season to end in the South Pacific. So March of 2018, I think it was March 10th, I believe, we left Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, and sailed 17 days, 2,700 miles to Ibaoa and the Marquesas. So it was me, Laura, and then we had Thad, who was a viewer, and he sailed with us for 4 or 5 months. I'm really glad he did. It was always his dream to do that. He had been in the Navy, but he wanted to do it on a private vessel. And I'm really glad he did that because he died a few years ago from cancer. And he was my age, maybe younger. So it's really sad, but I'm glad we got to hang out with him and do all that. So he's a good dude. So we sailed to French Polynesia, got stuck in Nivaoa for a little bit because they wanted our insurance to specifically say, covers French Polynesia. So we had to get that taken care of. And then, but it was such a fast sail. So we only spent a month in all of French Polynesia, so we would 7 days in the Marquesas, and then 7 days in the Tuamotus, and then a couple weeks in the Society Islands. That's Tahiti and Bora Bora and all that, Moorea. And then I believe it was Tonga. We only stopped in Tonga for a few days, and then Niue, spent about a week there. And then Fiji, spent a month in Fiji. We had various crew come and go. That's where Thad got off the boat. We had a couple other girls join in Fiji. That's where I had a firework blow up in my face, and I'm just really lucky I got to keep my eye in Fiji, and I went to the Fijian hospital and all that. And then Fiji to Vanuatu to Papua New Guinea, to Indonesia. We only spent a month in Indonesia. And then we left Bali. We picked up a couple paying passengers from, I think it was Bali, all the way up to, we couldn't drop them in Singapore because they were Chinese and they didn't have the proper visa for Singapore, so we dropped them in Malaysia. But on that trip, our autopilot failed, so we sailed 1,000 miles without an autopilot. And then we were going to cross the Singapore Strait. The engine wouldn't start, the starter had gone out. So then we sailed to Malaysia, dropped them off, sail off anchor, and sail to Singapore, and that's where Ron from Island Spirit meets us, and we he gets our starter fixed, and then we sail with them up to Thailand. And so I left late October, and we made it to Thailand in early September. But we left Mexico March 10th, and we made it to, I believe it was September 9th is when we made it to Thailand. So it was 6 months to go all that distance. That's a long way to go. I think we were averaging something like a third. We averaged, I think it was 2.5 months. So of those 6 months, two to 2.5 months was actually at sea. So a lot of sailing time. So this boat was for sale in Annapolis. The owner let me owner finance it. We came and looked at it, and we ended up buying it. And then Laura and I split up, and then that's when I met Taylor on Instagram. She came down and sailed, and we sailed for a year and a half. We went down to the Caribbean and back. And then she bought a boat and started her own thing. And then then I was gonna sail this boat around Cape Hatteras, and I did. And then that's when I had the transmission fire. And that would have been October or November of 2020. And it was going to be 6 months in a shipyard and $90,000 to refurbish this boat, which I didn't want to do, so I sold it. And then I bought the motor yacht, and it was already down in Puerto Rico, so stayed down the Caribbean there with that for a while. And then I did a trip to Thailand, and that's where I met Stephanie. And she stayed with me for a couple years, and then we brought the boat back to the Hatteras and sold it in Florida. What else? And then, then I was expecting to have a new catamaran, and then, life happens, right? I was hoping to get. So then, I guess I could talk about Amanda. So I had met Amanda. Amanda sailed with us for a few months on season 1. I had met her even before I started Sailing Doodles, and then it was just a good time for her. She was didn't have anything keeping her back, and so she sailed with me for a year and a half. And then so that was in February when we split up. Very amicable split up, so it is what it is. But so I've been more or less solo since then. I've had crew, right, but not like a girlfriend or anything, and I'm kind of solo until who knows what happens. But I don't know. I'm sure I left a lot of stuff out on that whole story. I didn't go too much into the Sailing Doodle stuff because I'm sure you could see it on that. But so I don't know. It's been a wild ride. I had no idea I'd be a YouTuber, right? That never crossed my mind as a younger person. But I'm glad, every terrible thing, like the brain hemorrhage or losing the boat or losing the other boat, it just, any negative thing that happens, there's always something to make positive out of it. Like, I would have never left my corporate pilot job. I would never have quit it to come do what I'm doing now. So I'm glad I was forced out of it. But I've learned that sometimes you gotta be uncomfortable, take a risk. Otherwise you'll never succeed. So if you're thinking about going out sailing, doing something, take the risk. You won't regret it. There'll always be another job to come back to. There'll always be something else to replace what you got now. You'll get back to that point. But you only get one life. You can't replace your life. So I hope it's been inspiring to somebody. Go out there and do it. Have fun. And, I'll see you guys in Annapolis at the Annapolis Boat Show. You'll get to see my new yacht there, the Island Spirit, hull number 3. And there's links down below if you want to buy tickets or make an appointment to go see that boat. And so I'm looking forward to the next chapter, which will be on that boat. I don't know exactly when this podcast is coming out, but what we're going to do is we're going to raffle off this boat. So it probably won't be out in time. The raffle probably won't be set up in time, but it's going to be in the next week, where you can win it, have a chance to win this boat. Void where prohibited, no purchase necessary. See website for details, all that stuff. But it's a good opportunity for somebody to do what I'm doing. So, all right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe to this video. Share it with somebody if you think they need inspiration, and we'll see you soon.